The smell of burnt transmission fluid and cheap rain was the first thing that hit me. I didn't slow down immediately, not at first, because after 20 years on the road, you learn that every light you see after midnight that isn't connected to a town is usually a problem. A broken down car on the shoulder is always trouble, even if it's not for you. But this looked bad. Really bad. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, somewhere on I-75 South in Kentucky. The kind of stretch where you can drive for 20 minutes and the only change is the brand of tobacco barn in the distance. I was hauling a container of frozen pharmaceuticals from Chicago down to Atlanta, a $300,000 load that was on a strict schedule. My Kenworth T680, a reliable old girl I called the Mule, was humming along nicely at 65 miles per hour. Then I saw the flickers. Not hazards, but something else. Something orange and desperate. I eased off the accelerator and downshifted. Up ahead, maybe a quarter mile, there was a silver sedan. A Lexus, maybe, wedged sideways into the ditch separating the highway from the woods. The driver's side was crumpled against a tree trunk, and a small, struggling fire was starting up near the engine block. Beside the car, illuminated in my high beams, was a man. He looked to be in his late 40s, wearing just a t-shirt in the damp cold. He wasn't waving a phone or a flashlight. He was using his entire body, leaping up and down like a madman. And then I heard the sound that sealed my fate. A scream, high-pitched, ragged, and terrified. It wasn't the man screaming. It was a woman. I hit the air brakes. The Mule shuddered, the sound of the tires gripping the wet asphalt echoing in the absolute silence of the highway. "Don't be a fool, Jerry," I mumbled to myself as I pulled onto the shoulder. "Just call 911 and keep driving. This isn't your problem." But the engine fire was getting bigger, and that scream sounded real. I shut down the engine, which felt like pulling the plug on a life support machine. The sudden silence was thick and immediate. I grabbed my heavy, 5-foot aluminum tire thumper from beside my seat. Just a precaution, you know? And stepped out into the damp, freezing air. The man met me halfway. He was shaking violently, his face a mess of panic and sweat. "Oh, thank God. Thank God," he kept repeating. "Please, my wife. She's trapped. Her leg. We hit that damn deer. She can't get out. You have a fire extinguisher, right? Please, we need water, something. That fire is going to get to the tank. My wife is going to burn." He gestured back toward the wreck. I saw the woman now. Her head was visible through the spiderwebbed rear window. Her face was pale, and she was crying silently, her hands pressed against the glass. Okay. Calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice low and steady. "I have 2 large extinguishers in the saddlebox, and a crowbar. I'm calling 911 now." I pulled my phone out. No service. Of course not. I was in the worst dead zone in the state. The fire is growing fast. "Can you put it out first, please? Just knock it down." I tried everything. My jacket, dirt. Nothing. The man pleaded. His urgency was infectious. The fear in his eyes seemed genuine. That's the choice that keeps me up at night. I could have driven a mile ahead to the next overpass to call 911. That would have taken 3 minutes. But in my mind, that was 3 minutes the woman didn't have. "Stay right here. Don't go near that fire. It's running on fumes now, it could pop," I commanded. I walked around the front of the truck to the passenger side where the saddle box was. The man was still standing in the middle of the road, anxiously looking at the wreck. I flipped the latch on the heavy aluminum box. The extinguisher was right there. A big, red, heavy cylinder. As my hands closed around the cold metal of the extinguisher, the sound of the saddlebox door slamming shut echoed like a gunshot. But it wasn't me who closed it. Before I could even turn my head, I felt a crushing weight hit me from behind. A blinding flash of pain exploded behind my eyes, and my knees buckled. The extinguisher fell from my grasp, hitting the ground with a dull, ringing clang. I remember the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth almost instantly. I fought to stay on my feet. My training kicked in. Spin and swing. But before I could complete the turn, a length of heavy chain wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air and my ability to scream. The man who had been panicking over his wife was suddenly there. His face was completely changed. All the sweat and fear were gone, replaced by a cold, surgical concentration. He wasn't holding me. The man behind me was. The man who had hit me. I didn't get a good look at him, but I felt his power. He was huge. "Don't move, old man. You just made a lot of people rich," the panicked man sneered. He used his foot to kick my tire thumper further under the truck. I was choking. My vision was going gray around the edges. The guy with the chain was dragging me backward toward the front bumper. My arms flailed uselessly. "Get the lock. Get the rig moving. I'll handle the body," the cold man ordered, his voice no longer pleading, but sharp and professional. "The woman. What about the woman?" My last conscious thought was a furious confusion. Then the man in front of me walked casually to the wreck. He reached through the cracked window and pulled the woman out. Her legs weren't trapped. She stood up, brushed off her clothes, and gave him a high five. She was the lookout. That was the deepest betrayal. Not just the violence, but the utter disregard for human decency. They played on my instinct to save a life. The big man released the chain just enough to let me take a ragged, painful breath. "Now you listen, driver. You're gonna crawl under your trailer and wait. Don't make a sound. Don't try to call out. We have eyes on this road for miles. You move, you die. Simple as that. We take the container. You take the fall." Got it. My lungs were screaming for oxygen. I could only nod. They didn't waste any time. The wife got into a beat-up SUV that had been hidden deep in the tree line and drove off to serve as the new lookout. The man who had played the husband expertly slid into my driver's seat. The huge guy, the enforcer, stood over me. "Where's the hidden tracking unit? All these pharma loads got one. Show me. Now," the enforcer demanded. His voice was rough, low, and completely lacking inflection. I pointed weakly to a panel under the dash. The enforcer ripped it open, found the small GPS unit, and crushed it instantly with the heel of his boot. They unlocked the trailer. I heard the distinct hiss of my air ride system stabilizing. The man in the cab, the actor, started the engine. The $300,000 load of life-saving medicine was about to disappear. I was left alone, bleeding, and terrified, crawling under my own trailer like a pathetic stray animal. I could feel the heat and vibrations of the big diesel engine above me. My only chance was to wait until they were gone. But how far gone was safe enough? Then I heard the distinct sound of another heavy truck braking coming up from behind. The sound wasn't hesitant like mine had been. It was loud and fast. The enforcer cursed violently. "Back up. Already. Move it. Move the damn rig, now." The actor gunned the mule's engine. The trailer jerked forward, and then the lights of my own truck disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone on the shoulder, surrounded by the smell of diesel and my own blood. I crawled out and ran, spitting blood, toward the road. The second truck, a plain white day cab, hauling an empty flatbed, stopped right where my rig had been. The driver, a woman with tight blonde hair and an even tighter grip on a flashlight, leaned out. "What the hell happened? Where's your truck?" I saw tail lights, then nothing. She yelled. "Hijacked. Staged wreck. 3 people. My truck. They took my truck. Go call police. North. They went north. I'm going after them," I gasped. I grabbed the crowbar from the ditch, not bothering with the police call. Not yet. I knew every sound my old truck made. I could track the mule. They had left me alive, thinking I was beaten, but they had stolen my life, my income, and nearly my soul. And the one thing they hadn't planned on was the rage of a man who'd just been tricked into sacrificing a child's college fund for a staged car wreck. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going home until I saw my trailer again. Story 2. It's not the road noise that wakes you up. It's the absence of it. That night, it was the dead, wet silence of a Missouri truck stop at 3 a.m. A silence that tasted like stale coffee and cheap diesel fumes. It was November 2023, and I was on a drive and run from Tulsa to St. Louis. An easy haul until that moment. I woke up suddenly, violently. Not from a bad dream, but from that primordial instinct that screams, "You are not alone." I was in my bunk, nestled in my heavy sleeping bag. My Kenworth W900, the Duke, was parked in a far corner of a Flying J lot near Kingdom City. The engine was off. Everything was dark. I kept the curtains tightly drawn, always. I lay absolutely still. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it would wake the guy in the next truck. I strained my ears. Nothing. Just the occasional drip, drip, drip of condensation hitting the asphalt outside. And the slow, steady tick of the cooling engine block. I tried to rationalize it. Just stress, Chris. You've been driving 12 hours. Go back to sleep. But then I heard it. A sound so small, so utterly out of place, that it froze the blood in my veins. A click. It was the precise, distinct sound of the door lock mechanism engaging on the passenger side door. The kind of thunk that happens when you manually push the lock button down. My doors were already locked. I knew they were locked. It was the first thing I do when I park. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to replay the sound. Was it just the truck settling? Was it a sound from the truck next to me? I held my breath, and then I smelled it. Cigarette smoke. Not stale residual smoke, but fresh, acrid smoke. Someone had just exhaled inside my cab. I was wide awake now. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. When did they get in? The last time I stopped was for fuel back in Springfield. Was the lock faulty? Did I forget to double-check the passenger side seal? I had two immediate options: scream or fight. Neither felt right because I didn't know where they were. My bunk sits directly behind the two front seats. The storage compartment for my tire thumper and my phone charger are on the wall right beside my pillow. The cab is maybe 8 feet long and 6 feet wide. Every inch of that space suddenly felt lethal. I slowly, meticulously, reached for my phone. It was set to silent, thank God. I felt around the shelf, found the rectangular block, and carefully gripped it. The faint glow of the dash lights was enough to confirm the time. 3:07 a.m. I held the phone close to my chest, my thumb hovering over the 911 call button. But what was I going to say? Someone might be in my truck. And what if they heard me? I decided to try to locate them first. I moved my hand toward the small control panel near the bunk, the one that controls the interior dome light. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely find the small plastic switch. If I turn on the light, I win or I lose everything in 1 second. Just as my fingertip brushed the switch, a shadow shifted. Not in the front seats. Not in the center console area, but right under my bunk. Most sleeper cabs have a large storage area accessible either from an outside hatch or by lifting the mattress. Mine had both, and I knew I had left the inside access door unlocked earlier that day when I was looking for a jacket. The mattress was maybe 8 inches above a storage well that runs the full width of the cab, and whatever was making the slight scraping noise was right there, directly beneath my hips. I didn't dare move the mattress. That would expose me completely. A new noise started. A slow, methodical scratching sound. It was coming from the thin plywood access door near the driver's side floor, next to my head, the hidden access point to the electrical wiring junction box. They weren't after me. Not yet. They were trying to disable my truck. They needed to kill the power, stop the engine from starting, or cut the airlines so I couldn't drive away. If they cut the airlines, I'd be immobilized. A sitting duck. I slowly pulled my knees up to my chest, trying to be silent. The sleeping bag rustled softly, and the sound felt like a cannon blast in the silence. The scratching stopped. I froze, heart practically in my throat. The air in the cab suddenly felt heavy and toxic. I knew the person under me was listening for the slightest sound of movement. I heard a slow, painful inhale from directly beneath me, then a whispered sound. It wasn't a word. It was a low, hissing exhale. I reached under my pillow. I always kept a small, heavy Maglite flashlight there. It was metal, dense, and a decent weapon. I had to get to the driver's seat. If I could start the engine, hit the panic button, or just drive, I had a chance. But the fastest way out was to swing my legs out onto the floor, directly over the head of the person under my bunk. I moved my left hand, pulling the blanket slightly off the bunk. The thin sliver of outside light confirmed the position of my boots on the floor. Then I saw a flicker of movement by the steering wheel. The perpetrator had an accomplice. No, wait. The scratching sound had resumed, faster now. The movement near the steering wheel was just the slight oscillation of the cab caused by the movement under the bunk. It was only one person, and they were trapped under the bunk. That realization gave me a surge of furious adrenaline. "You're in my house, you bastard." I gripped the Maglite like a baseball bat. Instead of swinging my legs out, I slammed the entire length of the flashlight down onto the mattress, directly above the space where I'd heard the exhale. I hit it hard with all my strength. The heavy thud of the impact was followed by a sickening, muffled cry of pain. "Ag! Damn it!" The whisper was male, young, and furious. I didn't wait. I scrambled off the bunk, landing on the floor and immediately backing into the narrow space behind the driver's seat. I flicked the main light switch. The interior flooded with harsh white light. The compartment door under the bunk was open. A young man, maybe early 20s, wearing a greasy black hoodie, was trying to worm his way out. He had a small pair of wire cutters in one hand and was clutching his head with the other. His eyes were wide with shock and fury. "Get out! Get out of my truck!" I roared, pointing the Maglite at his face. He didn't run. Instead, he lunged. He was fast, driven by panic and pain. He scrambled over the passenger seat, heading for the door he'd secretly locked. He knew he was exposed. As he fumbled with the lock mechanism, I lunged forward. I didn't swing the flashlight again. Instead, I went for the air horn cable. I grabbed the cord and yanked it down with all my strength, simultaneously hitting the emergency button on the dash. The sound was apocalyptic, a deafening, screaming blast that echoed across the entire truck stop, followed by the blare of the Duke's emergency alarm. It was so loud it was physically painful, even to me. The sound stunned the attacker. He clapped his hands over his ears, his body hunched in confusion and pain. I kept the air horn pinned down. The continuous, screaming blast was better than any weapon. It was calling the entire world to the scene. Another engine started up nearby, then another. The lights from the truck stop building started blinking. People were awake. The intruder knew it was over. He finally threw open the passenger door and stumbled out, still clutching his head. He ran awkwardly, disappearing into the shadows between two other big rigs. I held the horn for a full 60 seconds after he was gone, until my ears were ringing and my arm was shaking. Then, I snatched the phone off the dash and finally dialed 911. When the police arrived, they found a small, cheap pair of wire cutters near the junction box. They also found a dirty, frayed piece of blanket jammed into the passenger side door seal. The guy hadn't been an expert lock picker. He had used the old trick of folding a piece of cloth into the seal so the automatic lock wouldn't engage completely. He must have slipped in hours earlier, while I was inside paying for fuel. He was a stowaway, waiting for me to hit the dark highway. They never caught him, but for months after that, I couldn't sleep without leaving the truck running. The low rumble of the diesel was the only sound that could drown out the terrifying thought. What if I hadn't woken up? Story 3. You learn the difference between a loud noise and a deadly noise. A tire blowout is loud. A sudden, complete silence when you touch the brakes. That's deadly. It was 1:00 a.m. in late April, and I was rolling over Donner Pass on I-80 West, just cresting the summit before the long, treacherous drop into Sacramento. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and leftover snowmelt. My rig, an old Freightliner Cascadia, was loaded heavy, about 78,000 pounds of appliances, and I was taking the descent slow, riding the engine brake like my life depended on it. Because up there, it always does. I tapped the foot brake to check my air pressure and slow things just a hair before I fully committed to the grade. The pedal went straight to the floor. It didn't resist. It didn't groan. There was no grinding sound, just a sudden, catastrophic absence of resistance. It was like stepping on a wet sponge. My heart leaped into my throat. I snatched the wheel, my eyes scanning the dash. The air pressure gauges, the ones that tell you the pressure in the primary and secondary brake tanks, were pinned perfectly at 120 psi. No alarm. No warning chime. The air system was fully charged. But I was accelerating. I mashed the foot pedal again, frantic now. Nothing. The truck continued to gain speed, the weight of the load behind me turning into a colossal, pushing force. I wrestled the gear shift. Clutch, pull the lever. Clutch, push. I jammed it down into a lower gear. The engine roared, struggling to hold the speed, but the needle kept creeping up. 45, 50, 55 miles per hour. Too fast for this grade. No, 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 I repeated, my voice cracking. I pulled the trailer brake handle, the yellow button, a dedicated lever that uses a separate air system to engage only the trailer brakes. It slammed into my hand with its normal resistance, but the truck kept accelerating. The trailer brakes are gone too. This wasn't an air leak. An air leak gives you minutes with alarms blaring. This was instant, total failure across both circuits. And it meant something had been surgically taken out of the system. I realized I had a runaway truck, a loaded missile aimed straight at the bottom of the pass. I scanned my mirrors wildly. The road behind me was empty, too empty. Then, far down below, I saw a flicker of light. Not police lights. 2 sets of bright, unmodified, high-powered LED headlights, positioned side by side off the shoulder of the main road, maybe 5 miles down. They were waiting. A cold dread hit me. This wasn't an accident. This was a hit. They must have used a drone or somehow timed it perfectly when I was stopped for a pre-trip inspection hours ago to tamper with the lines. They didn't cut the air lines, which would give me a warning. They must have sabotaged the valves or used some kind of chemical agent to destroy the seals in the brake pots, causing catastrophic, immediate bypass. They were waiting for the truck to crash and burn at the bottom of the grade, letting them swoop in for the easy cargo recovery. I was now doing 65 miles per hour, way past the safe limit for the mountain. My only chance was the runaway truck ramp, the only one on this side of the pass. I knew it was coming up in about a mile, a huge gravel incline designed to capture out-of-control vehicles. But I had to slow down just enough to make the turnoff, or the centrifugal force would kill me. I grabbed the CB microphone, my hands slick with sweat. Breaker 19, Breaker 19, westbound I-80 Donner Pass. Runaway in progress. Total brake failure. Approaching runaway ramp. Do not enter ramp area, I yelled. My voice was met by a crackle of static and then a high-pitched metallic whine, the sound of the engine struggling under the strain of me trying to force it into 4th gear. I looked at the turn-off sign. 0.5 miles. I had about 30 seconds. I tried the last resort, the parking brake. This is an independent, spring-actuated brake designed for parking only. Using it at this speed would instantly lock the drive wheels, risking a catastrophic jackknife and flipping the rig. But I had no choice. I grabbed the yellow diamond knob for the parking brake. I pulled it halfway up, just enough to apply pressure, hoping to scrub off speed without locking the wheels. The truck protested instantly. The tires shrieked, laying down two trails of thin, black smoke. The cabin shook violently. The smell of scorching rubber and oil filled the air. The speedometer dipped slightly, agonizingly slow. 62 miles per hour. 60 miles per hour. The wheel started to shimmy. I fought it, muscles burning, trying to keep the massive machine pointed straight. I need 55 miles per hour. Just 55. The ramp sign was flashing red now. Enter here. I reached the turnoff, still doing 58 miles per hour. I wrenched the wheel hard right. The Cascadia groaned, the trailer swinging wide in a violent arc. Everything loose in the cab went flying. I braced myself, praying the truck's momentum wouldn't drag me straight over the guardrail and down the ravine. We held, just barely. The instant the front wheels hit the gravel of the ramp, the resistance was immense. Stones sprayed everywhere, sounding like heavy rain hitting the metal. The truck bucked and slid sideways, throwing me against the seatbelt. The speed dropped like a stone, 50, 40, 30 miles per hour. The ramp was designed to take trucks hundreds of feet up a steep grade. I kept the wheel steady, focusing on the dark wall of gravel rushing toward the windshield. Finally, with a sound like a ship hitting a reef, the front of the truck plunged deep into the gravel bed. Then silence. The engine died from the sudden, jarring stop. I sat there, breathing hard, covered in dust and sweat. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. I was alive, but I was completely stranded, stuck halfway up a gravel mountain in the pitch black. I ripped the CB mic off the dash. 80 westbound, Donner Pass. Truck number 147. I'm on the runaway ramp. Total brake failure. I made it. Where are you, you bastards? No answer. Just the steady crackle of the CB. I looked in my side mirrors. The road below was dark and silent. The two sets of high-powered headlights I had seen 5 miles down were gone. They had seen the dust cloud, seen the truck enter the ramp, and now they knew the crash and loot operation had failed. I wasn't safe. I was now a massive, immobile target. They knew exactly where I was, and they knew I couldn't drive away. I grabbed my phone. Full bars. Finally. I called the state patrol first, detailing the brake failure and my location. Then I called my company's emergency line. Listen to me. My brakes were cut. They are coming for the load now. I need a helicopter. I need a cruiser. I need somebody here in 5 minutes, or you're losing 78,000 pounds of cargo. Do you understand the urgency of this? While I was on the phone, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the sound of an engine. It was the distinct, rhythmic clicking of heavy boots on the highway asphalt below. They were approaching. On foot. I hung up, grabbed my tire thumper, and locked myself behind the wheel. The moonlight was just bright enough to see the shape of the ramp opening below, and then I saw them. 2 figures in dark clothing. They weren't running. They were walking slowly, confidently, up the gravel road toward my disabled truck. They knew I couldn't move. The isolation was absolute. I was trapped inside a giant metal coffin, waiting for the people who tried to murder me to finish the job. I racked the slide of the pistol I keep hidden in the dash, making a sound that was thankfully lost to the night air. Come on, you sons of... I whispered. You wanted the wreck. Now you get the war. I had made it through the impossible descent. But the true battle for survival was only just beginning. Story 4. You think the worst thing on the road is what you see in front of you. It's not. The worst thing is what you know is behind you, locked in the dark. It was the summer of 2022. I was on a desperate run, having taken an unauthorized, high-paying broker load to bail myself out of some bad debt. The details were weird right from the start. The pickup was at an unlisted cold storage facility deep in the Arizona desert, 40 miles off I-10. The place looked less like a warehouse and more like a cinder block bunker. The manifest simply read, high-value pharmaceuticals, time-sensitive. Must maintain 35 degrees Fahrenheit. The yard was empty. Just one guy, a tall, silent man with a face like sun-baked clay, who wouldn't make eye contact. He backed my reefer trailer, refrigerated unit, up to a dock marked Bay 7. I checked the seals. They were heavy-duty, brand-new steel locks. The transfer took maybe 3 minutes. The paperwork was minimal. The strange man just handed me a slip with the destination address in New Orleans and whispered, "Don't stop. Don't open it. We'll see you there." I set the reefer unit running. The deep, rhythmic hum of the refrigeration engine started up. That sound is usually comforting, the sound of cold stability. But that night, it sounded like a heavy, mechanical heartbeat. I got back on the highway heading east. I drove for maybe 2 hours, passing nothing but scrub brush and the silhouettes of desert mountains. That's when I first heard it. It was incredibly faint, barely a flicker of sound over the road noise and the reefer engine. It sounded like sniffling. I told myself it was the wind. The wind sometimes makes these hollow, mournful sounds when it hits the vents on the side of the trailer. I turned up the country music, ignored it. Another hour passed. I stopped for fuel in Lordsburg, New Mexico. I did my walk around. The tires were good. The reefer temperature was steady at 35 degrees. I double-checked the rear seals, tight as a drum. No pry marks. Everything looked fine. But as I stood by the rear doors, the reefer unit momentarily cut its cycle, that brief, chilling silence, and I heard it again. Louder this time. Muffled, weak crying. Like a small child, or maybe a terrified animal. My blood went cold. This is human trafficking. That was my immediate, sickening thought. The anonymous warehouse. The silent workers. The valuable, sealed cargo. I snatched my phone. I had to call the police. But if I called the police and they found a person inside, I'd be implicated. I'd lose my truck, my license, and probably go to prison. If I opened the seal, I'd break the contract and risk my life against whoever was paying for this illegal load. I leaned my ear against the aluminum door. "Hello. Hello in there," I yelled over the diesel idling. "Are you okay? Can you hear me? I'm gonna get you help. Just tell me you're there." The crying stopped instantly. Instead, I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic scratching. It wasn't the sound of fingernails on metal. It sounded like dry bone on a wooden crate. Then came a whisper. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like it was right next to my ear, despite the thick insulation. Don't open the door." The voice was thin, raspy, and seemed to lack gender or age. It felt less like a person speaking and more like a dry sound in my head. I jumped back, stumbling away from the trailer. I looked wildly around the truck stop. It was 4:30 a.m. A few truckers were fueling, looking tired and disinterested. Nobody was watching me. I got back in the cab, slamming the door. I drove away fast, pushing the speed limit. I was terrified of being caught, but now I was equally terrified of the load itself. As the sun came up, I kept driving. The whispering stopped during the day, replaced only by the incessant hum of the reefer. I tried to rationalize it again. Reefer madness, road hypnosis, exhaustion. That evening, I pulled into a legitimate truck stop near El Paso, determined to find out what was inside. I had to know if I was hauling a person. I grabbed my bolt cutters and walked toward the trailer. As soon as my hand touched the cold steel of the rear door, the reefer unit, which had been cycling smoothly, began to sputter violently. The engine started screaming, then it coughed and died. I rushed to the front. The control panel was flashing an E12 error, critical sensor failure. The temperature inside was beginning to rise immediately. Before I could restart it, the silence returned, and with it, the sound from the trailer. It wasn't crying now. It was giggling. A low, sinister, joyful giggle. And the whisper returned, this time stronger. "You can't leave me. Not until New Orleans. You promised. I looked up at the door. I saw a small, wet smear appear on the smooth, dry aluminum. Then another. It looked like someone was pressing their damp hand against the inside of the door, except there was no way condensation could form inside out like that. I backed away from the trailer, gripping the bolt cutters so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't a hostage. This wasn't human trafficking. This was a phantom. Something that was using my truck as its coffin on wheels. I abandoned the bolt cutters and ran back to the cab. I managed to reset the reefer unit after 10 minutes of frantic work. When the engine roared back to life, the giggling immediately stopped. I drove non-stop for the next 18 hours. I didn't stop for gas until I absolutely had to. I never turned off the reefer unit again, hoping the loud engine noise would drown out whatever was in the back. But the effects were starting to show on me. I started seeing things in the mirrors. Small, dark shapes darting behind the trailer. I became convinced that every car that pulled up beside me was being told to follow the cursed truck. I was running on pure adrenaline and terror. 2 miles outside New Orleans at 5 a.m., I finally made it to the drop-off. It was a legitimate seafood distribution center. Well lit, busy, normal. The same silent man who had loaded me was waiting. He didn't look surprised to see my sweat-drenched, wild-eyed state. He simply nodded. You made it. Good job. I jumped out of the cab. Take it. Just take the load. What was in there? What did I haul? He didn't answer. He just directed the dock worker to unseal the doors. I watched, trembling, as the massive steel locks were cut. The doors swung open. The reefer unit was stacked floor to ceiling with plain wooden crates. Nothing fancy. No screaming children. No body bags. Just wood. I watched the dock crew unload every single crate. Each one was heavy, marked only with a single, black, hand-painted symbol that looked like a bird claw. When the trailer was completely empty, I rushed inside. There was nothing. No blood. No moisture. No sign of life or struggle. Just cold, sterile aluminum. Except for one thing. On the metal floor, directly where the last crate had sat, was a small, desiccated object. It was a single white doll's shoe. It looked ancient and dusty. I bent down and picked it up. It was cold to the touch. As my fingers closed around it, the cold man walked up behind me. Payment, he said, handing me a thick envelope of cash. $12,000. Now go home, driver, and forget the load. We told you not to stop. I drove away, leaving the shoe on the dock floor. I drove for 3 days straight back to Arizona, avoiding every rest stop. I never took a broker load again, and every time I turn the ignition on a reefer unit, I hold my breath, listening not for the engine's hum, but for the silence in between the cycles, because that's when you hear the things that were never meant to be heard. And I still wonder what that symbol meant, and what they really sealed inside those wooden boxes. Story 5. You trust another trucker with your life. You trust them with your rig. But you never trust them with your secrets. And you especially don't trust them with your coffee. I met Ronnie back in the spring of 2021. We were pulling the same regular route, furniture loads from North Carolina up to distribution centers in Chicago. We were never running together, but we always seemed to intersect. Same fuel stops, same truck washes, same greasy spoon diners off I-65 in Indiana. Ronnie drove a beat-up, late-model Volvo. Clean truck, though. He was a skinny guy, maybe mid-50s, with a thick, reddish mustache and eyes that were unervingly pale blue. The kind of guy who talked about fishing and football and his ex-wife's bad choices. Completely normal. We started running companion style sometimes. Not convoying, but checking in on Channel 19 whenever we were within 50 miles of each other. Hey Ronnie, how's the wind on the western slope? Easy tonight, Jake. Grab a shower at the next pilot. They finally fixed the hot water. It was comforting. It killed the loneliness. One particular night in December, the roads were bad. Black ice started hitting I-74 around Danville, Illinois. I pulled into a massive rest stop that was practically empty, save for 3 or 4 dark rigs. Ronnie pulled in right beside me an hour later. "Glad you made it, buddy," he said over the CB. "That black ice is pure murder. I'm shut down until sunup." "Smart man," I replied. "I'm making a pot of coffee. Come on over." "You bring the sugar. I've only got creamer." Ronnie agreed. He came over 5 minutes later, carrying a little plastic baggie with instant coffee and a jar of sugar. He settled into my passenger seat. We were talking about tire chains and Christmas bonuses. Nothing threatening. Just 2 lonely guys waiting for the sun. But as we talked, I started noticing things about Ronnie that I'd ignored before. Little things that, when piled up in the silence of a cold cab, started to twist my stomach. First, the eyes. He had a habit of talking without ever blinking. Not once. His eyes would just stare, wide and pale, straight ahead or straight at me, for what felt like minutes. It was profoundly unsettling. Second, the questions. He'd always ask about our lives outside the cab. Not just generic stuff. He'd zero in on specifics. "So you said your daughter is in college in Ohio. That's a nice little town. How often do you get up there? Do you drive that rig or the smaller pickup? You told me your ex-wife took the house in Tennessee, right? So where are you laying your head now? Just the sleeper? Do you have a permanent place where the mail goes?" The questions were too specific, too focused on vulnerability. He was mapping my life, figuring out where I'd be missed and when. I dismissed it as loneliness. Just a lonely old guy who likes to pry, I thought. Then he made the coffee. He poured 2 mugs of hot water from my little electric kettle. He opened his baggie of instant coffee and offered me a little scoop. "Don't worry, man. I've got enough for us," he said. "But I prefer my own brand. This new blend is killer. You want to try it? It really keeps you sharp." He was already stirring the black powder into his mug. He reached toward my mug with a small, specialized measuring spoon. No, I'll stick to the decaf instant tonight, Ronnie. Don't want to get too wired." I lied. I hated decaf instant. He paused, the spoon half an inch from my mug, his wide, pale eyes fixed on me. He didn't blink. Not once. "Suit yourself," he said, pulling the spoon back. But the pause was too long. It felt like a decision had been made in those 2 seconds. He sat back, sipping his coffee. I drank mine. We talked for another hour. But my paranoia had spiked. Why did he insist on sharing his coffee? The next morning we parted ways, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything Ronnie had asked me. The questions about my family, my addresses, my routines. 2 weeks later, I was fueling up in Kentucky when I saw a news report on the little TV inside the fuel center. A trucker had been found murdered in his sleeper cab behind a warehouse in Michigan. The article mentioned he was carrying valuable electronics. It also mentioned he was a regular on the I-65/I-74 corridor. The photograph they showed of the victim wasn't Ronnie, but the description of the man police were questioning, a white male, mid-50s, driving a late-model Volvo semi, known to frequent the Danville/Indianapolis truck stops. My hands started shaking violently. I immediately went out to my truck and grabbed the little digital camera I use for insurance photos. I drove 2 hours out of my way to a remote, empty lot. I parked and opened the floor panel under my passenger seat. Ronnie had left his mark. Under the seat, there was a small, nearly invisible smear of something thick and dark. It looked like dried mud, but it had a distinct metallic smell. I took photos of the stain, then started scrubbing it with disinfectant. I spent 30 minutes cleaning every single surface that Ronnie's hands had touched. But the real paranoia hit when I got back on the road. I changed my route completely. I stopped using my call sign on the CB. I started sleeping with the tire thumper under my pillow and the keys in the ignition. I was in Ohio the following week when I saw another news report. They found a second victim. A female driver this time, found in her truck in Pennsylvania. They noted that the cause of death was unusual, something to do with respiratory failure rather than blunt force. I remembered Ronnie's killer coffee. I remembered the measuring spoon he'd wanted to put in my mug. I pulled over and called a friend of mine, a private investigator who used to work for the state police. I told him everything. The pale eyes, the specific questions, the forced friendliness, the coffee. He listened patiently. Then he asked me one simple question. "Jake, did you ever look at his truck's license plate? The last 3 digits." I told him I didn't remember. I never look at other people's plates. Well, Jake, the guy we're looking for, the suspect in the Michigan and Pennsylvania cases, drives a Volvo. The last 3 of his plate are 404. Does that ring any bells? I closed my eyes, trying to conjure the image of the plates. I couldn't. But then I remembered something else. The stickers. Ronnie had 3 small, personalized stickers lined up perfectly on the back of his sleeper window. One was a fishing lure. One was a sticker that read, I-40, I'm out. I-40, I'm out. 40. The 4 and the 0. Was it a coincidence? Was the IA-1? Or was it a signal? My PI friend told me that the police believed the killer was using small, undetectable doses of drugs mixed into drinks to incapacitate his victims before theft or assault. The fact that Ronnie had been so insistent about sharing his special blend suddenly became the most terrifying moment of my life. Ronnie vanished shortly after the Pennsylvania case. The Volvo disappeared. I drive a different rig now. A bright red Peterbilt. I use a different route. I never stop talking to anyone at fuel stops. I avoid making friends. But every time I see a Volvo in my mirrors, my heart starts pounding. And every time I look into someone's eyes who has that unsettling, unblinking stare, I immediately change my lane. I still wonder if that coffee was spiked. And if I hadn't made that spur-of-the-moment lie about the decoff instant, would I have been the 3rd victim found in a cold sleeper cab? Story 6. The scariest thing I ever saw wasn't a wreck or a gun. It was something that proved the laws of physics only apply if the universe is paying attention. It was a cold, clear night in March 2019. I was pushing through the desert stretch of I-10 between El Paso and Van Horn, Texas. The kind of place where the stars hang so low you feel like you could touch them. My load was standard freight, plastic sheeting and industrial components, nothing valuable, but I was on a tight deadline. I hit the desolate zone around 1:00 a.m. I had the cruise set at 75 miles per hour, the speed limit out there. The silence in the cab was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the tires on the expansion joints. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the median barrier. Not walking, not hitchhiking, but just standing. Right on top of the concrete divider that separates the east and westbound lanes. He was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in something dark that flapped slightly in the high wind. I slowed down, immediately suspicious. Was he trying to jump? Was he hurt? As my headlights swept across him, I realized he was facing away from me, looking toward the distant mountains. And he was holding something long and thin, like a stick or a walking cane, pointed at the sky. I passed him quickly. My rig, a flat-nosed International, vibrated with the speed. Crazy bastard, I muttered, shaking my head. I looked in my driver's side mirror. He was still standing there. But then, as I watched his reflection shrink in the small rectangular glass, the figure did something impossible. He turned his head. Not his body. Just his neck rotated 180 degrees. His face, a pale oval, was staring directly into my cab. I slammed on the brakes for a second, then immediately released them. The rig swerved slightly. My heart leaped. That was a full mile back. The angle should have made his head nearly invisible, even if he had turned his body. I pushed the speed back up. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the reflection was just playing tricks with the light distortion from the heated mirror. I drove for another 5 minutes. I was already 7 miles past where I saw him. I forced myself to focus on the yellow line. Then I glanced down at my side mirror, the one that covers the long expanse of the trailer. And I saw him. He was on the shoulder of the road, maybe 50 yards behind my trailer. Running. He was running with an absolutely inhuman, smooth gait. His knees weren't bending sharply. His arms weren't pumping. He was just gliding over the rough ground, matching my 75 miles per hour speed perfectly. The long object he was holding was gone. His dark clothes were pressed against his body by the wind. I thought I was hallucinating. This was physically impossible. A human being cannot sustain 75 miles per hour, especially not on that rough, rocky terrain. I floored the accelerator. The diesel engine roared in protest. 78 miles per hour. 80 miles per hour. I wasn't just driving. I was trying to escape a predator. In the mirror, the figure responded instantly. It started gaining on me. Not running faster, but changing its gait. It dropped its torso lower, its hands sometimes skimming the ground, creating a terrifying, elongated silhouette. It looked like a massive, galloping spider. My foot was shaking on the accelerator. I couldn't outrun it. The figure was now less than 30 yards from my rear bumper. I could see the details now. His skin was a sickly, glistening white, and his eyes, even from that distance in the dark, were too big, reflecting the red marker lights of the trailer with an unsettling gleam. And he wasn't blinking. I grabbed the CB mic. Breaker 19, eastbound 10. Is anyone seeing a pedestrian on the shoulder near mile marker 170? Somebody, please, tell me you see this. Static. Just static and the roar of the wind. The thing was so close now I could feel the paranoia drilling into my skull. Why was it chasing me? Was it after the truck? Was it after me? I kept pushing the truck, trying to get to a hill, a curve, anything that would break the visual. As I looked back in the mirror, the thing dropped again. This time, it went down completely on all fours. Its movements became even more fluid and terrifying. It moved with the speed of a cheetah, its limbs impossibly long and thin. It was no longer a man running. It was something else entirely. Something ancient and hungry. It reached the rear of my trailer. I could see its fingers, long, pale, and claw-like, slapping against the aluminum door, not grabbing but just making contact. A terrifying, possessive touch. The instant it touched the trailer, the cab lights flickered violently. The air conditioning went from cold to hot in a second, and a faint metallic smell, like ozone and old blood, filled the cab. I instinctively swerved hard to the left, then back to the right, attempting to shake it off. The trailer swayed dangerously. The thing held on. I decided to stop. I slammed on the brakes, hard enough to trigger the ABS. The truck groaned and screamed, shedding speed violently, 80, 60, 40 miles per hour. My intention was to slam the truck to a halt and confront it with my tire thumper. But the thing anticipated the stop. As the truck dropped below 50 miles per hour, it let go of the trailer. It sprinted ahead, covering the distance in maybe 2 seconds, and planted itself directly in the center of my lane. It stood upright again, tall, thin. Its arms hung down past its knees. It didn't move. It just stood there, waiting for my 80,000-pound rig to hit it. The sheer, terrifying confidence of the posture broke me. It wasn't trying to hide. It wanted me to see it. I wrenched the wheel hard right, veering off the highway onto the deep, soft shoulder. I flew over the rumble strip, bouncing violently, the truck pitching and rolling in the dirt. I was heading straight for a clump of jagged scrub brush. I looked back quickly. The thing was still standing there in the middle of the road. It raised its head slowly, and I saw a flash of its huge, unblinking eyes. I fought the wheel, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and sand. I fishtailed back toward the asphalt and finally managed to regain control, shooting past the creature by maybe 20 yards. I never looked back again. I kept the accelerator floored for the next hour until I saw the brilliant glow of Van Horn. When I reached the brightly lit fuel stop, I immediately pulled over and killed the engine. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and ran back to the trailer. I checked the seals. They were intact. I checked the tires. They were fine. But then I saw it. On the smooth aluminum door of the trailer, right near the bottom edge where it had slapped the metal, there was a mark. It wasn't a scratch. It looked like a handprint. But it was too big, too elongated, and instead of 5 normal fingers, there were only 4 long, pale impressions pressed into the metal. 4 fingers and a thumb that was almost non-existent. The print was dry, but it felt cold to the touch. I called the police, but what could I tell them? I saw a demon chasing my truck at 75 miles per hour. I told the officer I saw a large animal acting strangely and nearly drove off the road. He chalked it up to an exhausted driver. But I knew what I saw, and I had the proof. I drove that load the rest of the way, but I never slept. Every shadow seemed to move. Every tick of the cooling metal sounded like footsteps. When I eventually got home, I sold that rig. I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping 20 feet away from that impossibly fast, unblinking creature that had chased me across the desert. And even now, I wonder, why did it stop? Why did it want me to run it over? And why did it leave that mark like it was signing its name on the cargo it almost claimed? Story 7. When you're driving, dispatch is God. They tell you where to go, they tell you when to sleep, and most importantly, you trust them with your life. That night, my dispatcher told me to drive right into my grave. It was a cold, miserable night in February 2024. I was hauling a high-security, refrigerated load $500,000 worth of specialized vaccines from a lab in upstate New York down to a major hospital in Richmond, Virginia. A rush job, sensitive freight, meaning extra pay and extra paranoia. I'd been on the road 12 hours, pushing through a sleet storm that had turned I-81 into a skating rink. I was ready to pull off in Roanoke and sleep, but I had a mandatory check-in call with my dispatcher, a guy named Dale. Dale was new. He replaced Janice, who had been there forever and knew every driver by the sound of their voice. Dale was slick, too smooth, always trying to sound upbeat and professional. I never liked him. I called in around 11:45 p.m. Hey Dale, this is Unit 44, heading south past Roanoke. Weather's holding me up. I need to shut down for 4 hours, but I'll still be 6 hours early for the Richmond drop. Dale's voice, filtered through the satellite phone, sounded strangely cheerful. Hey 44, glad you called. Listen, great news. The Richmond hospital had a supply chain issue. They're canceling the main delivery for 0600 hours, canceling $500,000 in vaccines. Are you serious? What am I supposed to do with it? I can't leave this load unattended, I said, instantly frustrated. Relax, relax, Dale chuckled. They've routed you to a secure holding facility instead. New drop-off, much closer. You won't have to drive through the city. Listen closely, this is the new address. He gave me a rural address, something that sounded like it belonged to a small farm road off a secondary highway. Route 642, near a place called Elk Creek. Elk Creek. Dale, that's 30 miles in the wrong direction, back toward the mountains. Is this place a secured dock? Does it have cameras? I need eyes on this load until I hand it off, I insisted. It's a company-owned overflow facility, Unit 44, fully secured. Janice set up the contract herself. It's a single bay, marked with a red flashing beacon. You just back in, use the key code I'm texting you now, and wait for the relief driver to arrive at sunup. Easy money. You'll be sleeping in 2 hours. The key code came through. 6 digits. The whole situation felt wrong. Why move a sensitive load backward, in the middle of the night, to a place I'd never heard of? But Dale insisted it was mandatory. Look, 44. I'm logging this as protocol change, client mandate. You have to follow the manifest. Get going. I'll see the satellite track update you when you exit I-81. Have a good night." He hung up without waiting for confirmation. That was the first curiosity gap. Dale never hung up first. Janice always waited for the driver to confirm the manifest. I pulled off I-81 and headed onto the secondary highway, Route 640. The road quickly deteriorated. It was narrow, winding, and completely unlit. There was no traffic, just me and the white glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. I drove for 20 minutes. The GPS signal, which had been perfectly fine, started to flicker. Then it went dead. "Signal lost," the screen mocked. I pulled out my paper map. Elk Creek wasn't even listed. The road signs were rusted and riddled with bullet holes. I was genuinely lost, deep in the mountains, alone with $500,000 in temperature-sensitive cargo. I grabbed the satellite phone to call Dale back. It was dead. No dial-tone. No power. I realized the moment I unplugged it from the dash port, it hadn't charged. It must have been dead before I even called Dale. Wait, if the phone was dead, how did I talk to him? A terrible, cold knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't used the satellite phone. I had used my personal cell phone, which had surprisingly grabbed a single bar of signal near Roanoke. I looked at my call log. There was no record of a call to Dale. The whole conversation had happened on a device I didn't recognize, or perhaps it hadn't happened at all. No, that wasn't right. I remembered the call. I remembered Dale's cheerful voice. But where was the record? I was now on the dirt track, Route 642. The trees closed in around the cab, the branches scraping against the fenders. The road was barely wide enough for my rig. And then, just ahead, I saw it, the red flashing beacon. It was mounted above a massive, corrugated metal building set back from the road. It looked less like a secure facility and more like an abandoned barn. There were no windows, no visible cameras, and the only light was that slow, pulsating red beacon. I pulled up to the gate. It was a heavy chain link fence with a keypad. I keyed in the code Dale had texted me. 237812. The gate didn't open. Instead, a small, recessed speaker box crackled to life. A voice, not Dale's, but deep and synthetic, said, "Cargo verification successful. Proceed to Bay 4. Bay 4. Dale said Bay 1, the red beacon bay. And how did a dead phone send a text message? I was in a trap. I slammed the truck into reverse, intending to back out to the main road, no matter the difficulty. But as soon as I engaged reverse, I heard the sound of a heavy metal door sliding open from the darkness of the building. And from the interior of the barn, 2 pairs of headlights snapped on, blinding me. They had already driven vehicles inside. They were waiting. They knew I was coming. I threw the truck into a low forward gear, intending to smash the flimsy gate and escape. But before my foot even hit the accelerator, I saw a large, powerful grapple hook shoot out from the darkness and lock onto my rear trailer door handle. The truck was immediately jerked backward toward the building. The massive metal door was closing behind me, ensuring no lights from the road could find me. I was fighting the wheel, fighting the engine, trying to pull away from the invisible winch, but the grapple hook held fast. I grabbed my CB. Mayday! Mayday! Unit 44 hijacked at Elk Creek. Route 642. They used a grapple. A voice came back instantly, clear as a bell, despite the dead zone. It was Dale's voice, but it wasn't cheerful. It was venomous. "You shouldn't have checked your old logs, 44. That satellite phone has been dead for a month. Janice was my mother, and you killed her when you hit that black ice last year. You should have stayed home, Jake. Now, give them the vaccines." The truth hit me like a physical blow. The cheerful new dispatcher. The mandatory change of plans. The detailed information about the load. It wasn't about the vaccines. It was revenge. The grapple hook yanked the truck further into the pitch-black barn. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind the trailer with a deafening clang. I was in absolute darkness, sealed inside a metal box with people who hated me enough to kill. I abandoned the cab, scrambling into the sleeper bunk. I pulled the heavy plywood panel off the wall, revealing my hidden safe. I grabbed the only thing that could save me now, my signal flare gun. I heard them outside the cab now, pounding on the doors. "Come on out, Jake. It's just business. Nobody gets hurt if you cooperate." I had one chance. I had to open the sleeper window, point the flare gun straight up through the roof of the barn, and hope the light could be seen for miles. I ripped the sleeper window latch. The glass slid open. I pointed the flare gun at the metal roof. I pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a blinding hiss. The projectile immediately ricocheted off the curved metal roof of the barn and plunged back down toward the cab. I ducked, covering my head. The flare hit the passenger seat with an explosive flash, filling the cab with thick, acrid smoke and blinding light. I didn't wait. I kicked open the driver's door and scrambled out, crawling beneath my own trailer. They wouldn't be able to see through the smoke. I grabbed the crowbar I kept under the chassis. I heard them running, coughing. They were coming for me. I had seconds. I scurried out from under the trailer and slammed the crowbar into the air lines, venting the air brakes. The massive hissing sound filled the barn, drowning out their footsteps. Now they couldn't move the rig, and the load would spoil. Revenge failed. I found a small utility door near the front of the barn. I smashed the lock with the crowbar and threw myself out into the cold night. I ran, hearing the pounding of heavy boots behind me, running away from the abandoned road, away from the dead satellite phone, and away from the ultimate betrayal. I still run from every single unknown number that calls my phone. Story 8. There are 3 things that will ruin a trucker's life: ice, fire, and the DEA. That night, I was facing all 3. It was a beautiful Wednesday morning in July 2023. Or at least it started beautiful. I was southbound on I-5 in Washington State, heading for the Canadian border crossing at Blaine. My load was completely routine: refrigerated seafood, frozen crab legs, destined for a distributor in Vancouver, BC. I had the paperwork, the required permits, and the seals I personally placed on the trailer doors were clean, bright yellow, and marked with the number 99477C. I hate crossing the border. It's always a tense, paranoid place. You're never sure if you missed a single form or if the agent just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I pulled into the commercial vehicle lane at Blaine. The whole place smelled like wet asphalt and ozone. I handed my manifest and passport to the border agent, a woman with a face that looked carved from granite. She barely glanced at me. "Cargo seals," she said, her voice flat. 99477C, I replied. She looked at her monitor, then back at me. "Driver, we have no record of that seal number. Your digital manifest shows the original seal was 99472A. You changed the seal." "Why?" My stomach dropped. "I didn't change the seal, ma'am. I put this one on myself at the distribution center in Tacoma. 99477C. I took a picture of it with my phone. It's right here." I fumbled for my phone, but she waved me off with an icy hand. "Pull through to secondary inspection now, and turn off all electronics. Do not power down the reefer unit." I pulled the truck forward into the massive, sterile inspection bay. The fear was immediate and total. Someone had swapped the seals. But when? And why? And what the hell was I carrying now? 2 men in dark, unmarked uniforms approached my truck immediately. They weren't Border Patrol. They were Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. That's when I knew I was in deep, irrecoverable trouble. They didn't ask me questions. They didn't even look me in the eye. One of them ripped the new yellow seal off the doors without a word. The snap of the metal echoed in the bay. The other agent, tall and lean, grabbed a small, specialized fiber optic camera and slid it through the crack where the doors met. He held the monitor up, watching the feed. He swore softly. "Call the captain. We got it. It's confirmed." My mind was screaming. What is confirmed? The granite-faced border agent walked up to my cab window. She had a new piece of paper in her hand. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice like grinding stone. "We received an anonymous tip 30 minutes ago about your specific unit. We are executing a search warrant. Get out of the truck, place your hands on the hood, and do not speak. You are being detained in connection with an interstate organ trafficking investigation."
Organ trafficking.
Not drugs, not stolen electronics, human organs. The realization hit me with nauseating force. I was driving a refrigerated truck, the perfect temporary transport for temperature-sensitive cargo. I felt the blood drain from my head, $500,000 worth of crab legs. No, I was placed in handcuffs and led to a small, cold, sterile room. Through a tiny window, I could see my trailer. They had opened the massive doors. I watched in horror as the HSI agents carefully began pulling out the neatly stacked pallets of frozen crab legs. But they weren't interested in the seafood. They were focused on a small, distinct section near the front. They found it almost immediately. Tucked between two massive stacks of commercial boxes, there was a single, unmarked wooden crate. It was about the size of a large dog kennel. It was heavy, and it had no label, no manifest number, and no origin. The agents carefully used crowbars to open the wooden box. I strained my eyes against the glare of the inspection bay lights. As the lid came off, I saw the flash of stainless steel and biohazard bags. I couldn't make out the contents, but the movements of the agents were slow, careful, and deeply disturbed. They quickly closed the lid and wrapped the crate in heavy plastic. The lean agent walked up to my room. He didn't uncuff me. "We know you didn't load this, Davies. It's too professional. But your seal was swapped in the dead of night. The seal you claim to have put on was manufactured in Mexico City and not used by your company. Someone paid a lot of money to use your truck as a mobile stash house for this haul. And someone is going to flip on you when we find out who did the loading. You're looking at federal charges right now. Where were you parked last night?" Every single minute, the heat in the room suddenly felt unbearable. My mind raced. Last night, I stopped at a busy truck stop near Everett, Washington. I had dinner. I did a full walk-around. I slept for 6 hours. But I was deep in the lot. Anyone could have swapped the seals, opened the door, and slipped that crate in, maybe 20 feet from my sleeper cab while I slept. That tiny window of trust was used to frame me. I knew the system. Once I was booked, I'd be off the road forever, fighting a lifetime sentence. I couldn't prove I didn't know. My word against a swapped seal and a refrigerated box of horror. The lean agent stepped out for a moment to answer his radio. That was my chance. My hands were still cuffed in front of me. I leaned forward, grabbing the corner of the small metal table. I pressed my wrist hard against the sharp metal edge, twisting. I focused on the pain. The cheap aluminum handcuffs snapped at the clasp. I was free. I still had my keys. I ran out of the interview room, ignoring the shouts of the clerk. I burst out the back door of the inspection facility and ran toward my rig. The agents were focused on the crate and the seized goods. Nobody was watching the exit of the detention area. I climbed into the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition. I slammed the door and threw the truck into gear. The lean agent screamed into his radio. "He's in the truck. Block the gate." I drove the rig out of the bay. The entire facility was suddenly a chaotic mess of flashing lights and shouting. I saw a cruiser start to pull across the main exit gate to block me. I knew I couldn't stop. I wasn't running from the crime. I was running from the frame-up. I hit the accelerator. The heavy International roared to life. I aimed my massive machine not at the gate, but at the flimsy chain-link fence separating the U.S. Customs facility from the main highway. I crashed through the fence with a sickening sound of ripping metal. The air brakes hissed violently from the shock. I left a long trail of twisted wire and sparking aluminum behind me. I was on the highway heading south, a fugitive. I had no phone, no passport, and a warrant out for international crime. I knew I had about 30 minutes before they flooded the highway with roadblocks. I had to ditch the truck. 15 miles south, I found a small, abandoned logging road. I drove the beast deep into the woods, pulled the keys, grabbed the cash I kept hidden in a coffee can, and walked away from my life. The last thing I did was open the reefer unit one final time. Not to check the seals, but to ensure the entire load would spoil. I wasn't going to let them retrieve the evidence of their crime. I had lost everything. My rig, my business, my identity. But I kept my freedom. And every time I hear a diesel engine, I wonder if the driver is a good person, or if they are just another unwitting vessel for someone else's darkness.